This is checking word problem number 10, interpreting the y-intercept and slope. So now what I have done so far is calculated my y-intercept, where I use the equation when x is 0. So I started off with my y-intercept. I know that x is always 0, so I took my 0 and put it in for x and substituted it. 0 times 3 is 0, plus 16 is 16. So my y-intercept is 0, 16. Then I plotted that on my graph, and then I went to my slope, and I kind of looked at my slope, and remember, slope is m equals the change in y over the change in x. So look at your work right now. Do you have your slope change in y over the change in x? If not, pause the video and add it to your notes. The slope for this one I calculated when it made a table of values that we substituted in, picked x, and I found that the slope is 3 over 1. Now I extended my slope a little bit longer because I'm going to be using my interpreting with that. I also kind of broke up my work because I noticed when I read this, there's a lot of questions I have to answer. So the first one is interpreting the intercept. So I needed to find the intercept. So that would be kind of like my number one thing that I did. So that was this area right here, number one. My second thing that I did was number two was the slope. So number two was this section right here. Number three, I'm thinking of as that graph. So it says graph the equation. So that's this section right here, and I'll talk about that after a little bit. And number four is this one right here, 76 feet. Like, well, how many seconds does the bridge reach 76 feet? So that's this section right here. So I'm going to number that section number 4. So that's how I organize my thinking in my word problems. You can actually even number your sections like that. So now with the slope, I used that slope and I went up 3 over 1, up 3 on my graph over 1, up 3 over 1. And I noticed when I hit 325 right here in my table on my graph, that's a nice little spot. It's a nice crosshairs. So I was like, oh, I'll use that to draw my line. Then I went up. And you notice how I was a little off on this one right here, where the 222, I was a little off. It actually should be up a little higher. And that's when it's in between those crosshairs. It gets a little like some a little bit low, others a little bit high, like this one up here is a little bit high. So I just kept going and I kind of put it where I thought I would until I hit this spot right here. So you want to look at your graph and you want to have point 840 is you want to look on your graph and did you go through that cross 840? If you didn't, you need to kind of erase it, adjust your line so you go through that, and then also that 325 is the points that would be looking for. If you went through those 2 points, give yourself a check, and you went all the way to the y-intercept at the end, and notice what I was a little bit low on mine, but I was close enough. And then an arrow at the end. We also are looking for that. For slope, you're giving yourself a check for the slope and the 3 over 1. Your y-intercept, you're looking at, did you write a coordinate pair that had 0? If you did, give yourself a check. And 16, 0, 16. So those are worth 2 checks. Now, going to our interpreting, and I'm going to use my interpreting pen, which is red for this one, so it really pops. My interpreting is the labels for our x and y, and we'll put that in all of our pieces here. So if x is, where is x? I was looking in my word problem right here. X is seconds. So I'm going to put seconds right here, just labeling it. So you want to put that in your group with your interpreting pen. Oh, I got the wrong section. That was the y, so it needs to be the x is seconds. Y is the feet, how high it is in feet. So that's the height in feet. So where does that usually go? So in your table, you want to make sure it's on your table. So I'm going to put seconds here. So if you don't have that on your table, make sure you label it right now with your labeling pen. And the height is our y, so it's the height measured in feet. Now when we get to our slope, I'm going to do the same thing. My slope, the change in y, is the height in feet. So y is feet, so that's 3 feet, and my x is seconds. So I'm going to label those, and then that fraction bar is every. Remember we talked about that earlier? So 3 feet every 1 second. So I'm going to write that. The bridge goes up 3 feet for every 1 second. Now you could switch it around and say every second the bridge goes up 3 feet. So that's saying the same thing, it's just a different way of saying it, and that's the cool part about L&L is that you can say things in different ways. But it does have to have that word every in that sentence. Now, our y-intercept will use the labels also. My 0 is the seconds, so I'm going to label that 0 seconds and 16 feet. So labeling it right in the coordinate pair really helps us to be able to interpret that. So at 0 seconds, when is 0 seconds? Oh, that's at the start. So when the bridge starts, and I'll put 0 seconds behind that so it's clear what I'm talking about in my y-intercept. When the bridge starts with 0 seconds, it is at 16 feet. And that is interpreting the y-intercept using those labels. So now I've got my answer for 3 of the problems, the graph, the y-intercept interpreting, and the slope interpreting. Now I need to figure out this 76 feet. Well, I notice that this feet is a label, and that gives me a hint, and I'll do it in red because that tells us that's equal to y. So I'm going to set that equal to y because that is the label which tells us it's the y. The most common mistake is to think it's the x, and if we use that interpreting to help us, that label interpreting to help us figure out which one it is, we know where to put it. So I'm going to write my equation, y equals 3x plus 16, and that 76 is my y, so I'm just going to put that right in for y. So 76 equals 3x plus 16. Oh, it's just solving an equation. So now I will subtract 16 from both sides so that I can zero that out, and that would be 760 equals 3x. Divide both sides by 3 to get x by itself. And remember, what is x? 20 is our answer, is the number, and our x is seconds. So I'm going to change to my labeling. So it takes 20 seconds for the bridge to get to the height of 76.